Walt, it's barely been a week since I've been back from London. I haven't even gotten through editing all my photos of that wonderful city. And lo and behold, Waymo announces they're going to London. Was it perhaps my ride that was flawless, by the way, in the Wayve vehicle Waymo was inspired to make the announcement now? We never know, but I'll tell you, big things are happening in the London market. And while big things are happening in the London market, big things are happening here. Waymo also announced a deal with DoorDash, which we'll get into later. And you continue to get update after update. And I'm a little jealous of your FSD 14. Let's start with that. I got to know the big question. Has it conquered your driveway yet? Are you going to the neighbor and saying, howdy ho, neighbor-o?
First, just to level set, since our last podcast, there's been 2 additional updates to FSD 14 that I've received. So I think the most recent one that I got that has been, most talked about, the Mad Max mode, which I'll get into briefly, that did in fact enable the car to successfully get up my driveway over and over. So I'm finally through that. So now I can press a button from a friend's house or from the fish store or from the grocery store or whatever, and it will go all the way into my driveway. I can't yet get it to park inside my garage, but all the way it will park in the driveway. So I'm obviously very pleased about that.
I'm glad you're very pleased, Walt, but I'm very curious. You talk about your love and affection for the fish store. Have you taken the owner for a ride yet?
I have not taken the owner for a ride. I do go to different locations. I went to an office complex this week, and it was kind of old school. They had reserved parking spots for the CEO of whatever random company that was in there, and the Tesla, just like it drives by handicap parking, drove by these reserved parking spots. There was no sign. It was literally just printing on the driveway, and then found the parking lot, and then found the next open spot. So I thought that was pretty impressive. I don't know if it's able to actually read what's going on and making those decisions on the fly, but it picked a guest parking spot in that case.
That's fantastic. Did it pull in? Did it back in? How is it parking in that spot?
In that spot, I believe it backed in, but in the fish store, it did a front end. So it's doing both. It used to just always back into these spots, but I think it's doing both. The front end in the fish store was a lot more natural this time. So that was definitely a positive.
I got to know, do you have a reserved parking spot at this fish store? Because every podcast we talk about your beloved fish store.
It's a very, maybe I'll send a video out of it. It's a very tight parking lot. It's a good test. To be honest, like the FSD has challenges getting out of it. I don't know. I think there's like a drainage grate on the bottom that it keeps pausing before going out ever since I've gotten into this FSD 14. It didn't have that hesitation in FSD 13. So maybe a future update will solve that one at our very famous fish store. By the way, Martha Stewart also goes to this fish store, so I'm not the only one that really likes this fish store.
So we have a common neighbor, but I digress on that point. What about these reports that I've been reading on X and to some degree Reddit with this abrupt braking? Are you experiencing any of that? Have you seen any improvements in the updates that you've gotten?
I mean, there's definitely been improvements, in the updates, but there is kind of random braking that occurs. And last night I had one in the dark. It's possible there was a deer that was about to cross the road, but it was very abrupt and slowed the car. I was probably doing, I would guess like 40, 45, and it started slowing it down to 15. So that one was more abrupt. So I think, but there's also little hesitation ones when you're about to pull out that are occurring that when you feel them, it makes you feel less certain. It's less smooth than FSD 13. So I think until they get that ironed out and back to the level of smoothness that they had at FSD 13, FSD 14 will probably remain with these kind of early adopters and the early adopter program. That would be my guess.
So you think once things are smoothed out, then it will go into a wider release? And do you have a prediction of a timeline of when you think that might happen?
I mean, the changes between, the updates that we've gotten have already been pretty solid. So, I would guess that it shouldn't. I mean, this is not like an unsolvable thing, right? We know it drives smoothly. And by the way, as an aside, this FSD 14 is definitely not a fork of what we experienced in Austin, because Austin felt more like 13 in terms of its smoothness. So the Austin Robotaxi that we've, both experienced had the smoothness and the parking ability. So I'm sure that these two things can get married for the FSD 14 that is going through a couple of these iterations.
Last thing on FSD 14 before we move on to the big news of the week, Waymo. I got to know, Mad Max, have you taken that 95? What's it like?
I did do tests on the Mad Max, and the primary thing you notice is that we've all experienced that situation where you're in the left lane on a highway and the person's just kind of driving slow. Their willingness of the car to switch lanes into the right lane and pass that driver on the left. So that lane switching, which is not aggressive, but there are situations where I was trying to get off at an exit and you have that red light, like it's not safe to go in. As soon as it went where it's good to go, it would go in front of it. So it's not overly aggressive, but certainly more willing to make lane changes. In terms of the actual speed itself, I was able to get into some kind of open highway situations where there was no traffic. And I think the way to think about it this way is I was on a 65 mile an hour speed limit. And, for hurry, which existed before Mad Max, that would probably take you up to about 80 miles an hour. If the kind of standard would take you to like 74. And then there's levels below that now down to even sloth, which will basically take you the speed limit or maybe below it. I don't know. Dangerous, I think, to drive at that speed. So what Mad Max does speed-wise, what took me up to about 84 miles an hour. So about 20 mile an hour differential to the speed limit. So that felt totally normal. There are places in my town where I was riding Mad Max where it's a 30 mile an hour speed limit and it was dialing up the speed to, 45, high 40s. And for me, I know there's obviously police in that area. So I scrolled down to lower speeds and it didn't feel perfect or great to be driving, high 40s in a 30. I'm sure there are 30 zones that exist out there where that's good, but it puts it up to the driver to make that discretionary roll down into a different mode.
I'm picking up here. Is there a common denominator that MPH, common those miles per hour, is going away and everything is getting a fancy name? Mad Max, hurry, sloth, and who knows what's next? Grandma mode? Is that where this is going?
I mean, it seems like that's the case where before you could control the speed with the actual number. Now it's basically just kind of a mode. And I think maybe that provides an opportunity that when we get to Robotaxi mode, that in your profile, you're going to pick a certain type of speed that you want to drive when you're in Robotaxi mode. The other question is, this is me as the consumer deciding how fast I want to drive. And I am liable, obviously, for that ticket if I get a speeding ticket. If you go into Robotaxi world and you pick, one of these hurry modes or Mad Max worlds, who's paying for that ticket? Will they enable this in the Robotaxi fleet when you're a customer as opposed to the user of the car?
That's interesting. You blew my mind. So you mean to think that there is a potential scenario where you, Walt, you have your Robotaxi profile and you select the type of driving you want, and then Robotaxi could eventually drive that way for you?
Yeah, I think that certainly makes sense. The question is, do they give me an option where it drives above the speed limit? Because again, in that case, they're becoming liable. They're the service. There's more liability as opposed to me, the consumer, making this decision on their own. I know we have listeners that think that the mommy state should take over and control what I have. And I would just question to those people, do you want a national regulation that goes to automakers and requires them to cap the speed on every car made at 80 miles an hour or 75 miles an hour? And if you don't want that, why should Tesla be treated any different in the cars that they're selling to private owners? In a Robotaxi world, I get it. I get that criticism. But in an FSD world where you're driving it, unless you're going to agree to allow your car to be capped at a certain speed, it's literally a double standard in terms of that particular criticism.
It's a double standard. And yes, there are folks that want to cap and regulate everything. That's not the democracy that we have here in the United States. There's been allegations this week that Tesla has these rolling stops. What have you learned about that? Have you experienced it? Have you seen it? What have you learned?
I mean, that's a bizarre one. And I think any of us that have FSD are irritated by the fact that our FSD, when it comes to a stop sign, goes all the way to 0 miles per hour. No car, you can't tell me, I don't want to say no, absolutes are always bad, but the vast majority of anyone that drives does not go to 0 miles per hour. I know we're going to be in our, oh, yes, I do, I'm sure. But if you looked at what 0 miles per hour represents on your speedometer as opposed to 1 or 2 miles per hour, I mean, everyone's coming to a rolling stock. So it was crazy when I saw, I think on Twitter, someone saying oh, they're going to do rolling stops now. I'm like, absolutely not. I've got video of it. That's not true. And frankly, when they do, I will applaud it. I don't want them rolling through it 5 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour, but certainly there's a comfort and normalcy to like when you get to 2 or 3 miles an hour, which is basically nothing in terms of how the car is moving, to enable that. And again, allow the consumer to make that, that decision on their own.
While Tesla continues to push the ball forward here in the United States, Waymo continues to expand, not just the United States, but globally. And this week, Waymo announced they're expanding to London in 2026. Having been there, met with officials, Waymo, and it's my assumption, will operate under the UK's pilot in 2026 with paying members of the public, and in 2027 expand to full commercial operations when the law becomes in effect. That is, if all look at the polls, there will be a change in the ruling party and a change in prime minister, so we need to watch that as well. The two big things outside the politics in the UK, which we'll get into after this: one, this is a Waymo One market, and two, this will be a Moove.io infrastructure partner, and there's big things coming with the road to autonomy and Moove, so tune in for that. But Walt, what do you make of this? No Uber, and they're going across the pond.
I mean, it's fascinating. It's becoming a bit of a battleground, and I kind of poo-pooed the relevance of the UK in prior podcasts, but this is shaping up to be a battleground. I mean, I kind of get London, big international city. It's also, we've talked about before, that I think these executives are competitive. So I'm guessing, no offense, Grayson, it might not have been you driving around in the Wayve, that video specifically, but maybe that was a reminder that Wayve is a partner with Uber, and that Waymo wanted to show that, hey, we can partner there. And what makes it incrementally interesting, again, Waymo going into a market where Uber is with Wayve already, is Waymo is using Moove, which is a company that Uber owns a minority stake in. So yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating on so many dynamics. Which one do you want to hit first?
Let's hit on the market dynamics, because if all goes according to plan, based on all of the public releases that are out there, London will become the first market where Waymo, with Waymo One, will compete against Uber with an autonomous vehicle on their platform. They're going to compete head to head in a market. This is going to get very, very interesting.
Yeah, and it speaks to kind of the fallout since, if we go way back to the partnership that Waymo has with Uber in Austin, and how subsequent markets have not included Uber. I've said on this podcast before, Seattle, Denver, still up for grabs, that Uber still could, I think, be the partner there. But, it seems like every new market we get ends up being Waymo One or Lyft or potentially new partnerships for Waymo.
And so here's the thing: having recently been in the UK, you can feel the political turmoil, you can feel the economics, and there's polling data and economic data to back up this statement. So Uber has a very public relationship with Wayve. They're an investor in Wayve. Do we perhaps see an Uber Wayve Neuro-like deal where perhaps Uber invests in JLR? I say that because creating jobs in the UK, retaining jobs, and having an OEM partner to really scale and conquer the UK market?
I don't know. I mean, Uber's throwing money around. I think in certain cases, let's take, in this case, Moove as a reminder. Moove is basically doing the charging and the servicing of these cars, and that's what they'll be doing in London. And this is what Uber also owns a minority stake in. Like, maybe Uber should be, as I've said before, investing capital and owning these things so that when someone like Waymo comes into a market and Moove is established, which is now would be an Uber owned, or in this case, maybe they roll up a bunch of these things, that it increases the likelihood that they're going to use Uber as their partner in that market, as opposed to Waymo One or Lyft or some other option that's in that market.
This is all hypothetical, but let's say that the London market continues to accelerate. It's being reported by the Financial Times this week that Wayve is currently in talks with Microsoft and SoftBank to raise an additional $2 billion and $8 billion valuation. Hypothetical again, Uber invests in that round. Could then Uber say, okay, Wayve is our partner, this is the horse we're backing, and look to accelerate that over markets as this relationship appears on the surface to be deteriorating with Waymo?
I think, like any early tech investor, you're going to start by spreading your bets broadly. And then those companies that are excelling, you're going to put more money towards. And if they believe that Wayve has a lead over the other options that are out there, whether that's Nuro or Main Mobility or whoever, that obviously they were going to put more capital behind it. So absolutely, that makes sense. And in part, it's for their fragmentation of the market. The question then is, at some point, like if Wayve becomes such a hot investment in attracting stuff like SoftBank or whatever, does Wayve go to Uber and say like, okay, we're going to let you invest as long as you don't continue to invest in May Mobility or Nuro or whatever else that you're thinking about there, and restrict their capital, because of the success that they think that they're going to have. Could that evolve?
It could evolve. I think if it does evolve, it'll probably be based on geographic markets. If you say take the UK and Europe, for example, but we know based on the press release and the SEC filing for the Nuro Uber Lucid deal that it is going global. We do have confirmation that they will be going to Saudi Arabia. It was in the SEC filing. So maybe it's a market by market basis or a country by country basis. That could happen. At this point, I'm unsure, but it seems like something really has to give.
But what do you mean something has to give in what context?
It's becoming very clear to me that Uber needs to pick their horse, or horses plural, and back them. Are there two horses, Nuro and Wayve, and those are the horses they're going to ride to compete against Waymo? Because I'm sitting here looking at this market and saying Uber needs an autonomous vehicle strategy. Yes, we're going to get the inbound on that. Waymo is not Uber's long-term answer. That's becoming very clear. Uber needs a long-term answer to compete with Waymo.
But I don't think that they necessarily have to pick their horse unless they're forced to, unless the scenario evolves, which I just described, which I'm not saying is likely, and the scenario being, Wayve saying it's us and I don't want you investing in anyone else. That's not typically how it works. So they don't have to make that choice now, right? Because, unless they're experts in knowing exactly what technology is going to succeed, they want to seed the market. And frankly, if you're Uber, you don't want one or two winners. You want 6 winners. You want a fragmented market. You don't want one guy to have more power over your ability to put product on their network. You want multiple sources. So I don't think that is the situation. But maybe on the flip side, if capital is really solid for Wayve and they're really confident about their product, maybe they can flip that narrative. And remember, the Wayve business model is not at all, at least the way I've understood it, relying on whether Uber's going to put a shit ton of these cars on their network. It's about licensing to OEMs and private ownership of Wayve enabled cars.
You're correct, and I want to state for the record, my ride in London in Wayve was one of the smoothest autonomous vehicle rides I've ever had, and I was completely thoroughly blown away by the technology and how smooth that ride is. Frankly, it was more smoother than a human. There was no roboticness to it. It was just pure smooth and really operated well in the London market. You're right about the Wayve business model. And staying on the theme of business models, this week Waymo announced a partnership with DoorDash, which this is their second delivery partnership after the one they originally had with UPS in the Phoenix metro region. Now, Waymo is going to deliver DoorDash orders, and ready for this, well, in a 315-mile service area. It's pretty impressive. What this deal reminds me of is the original Motional Uber Eats deal. So Waymo seems like they're expanding into delivery. What do you make of this announcement?
Well, Grayson, I hope for Waymo's sake that it's nothing like what you just talked about, because those two things are now failed, right? There's no UPS or USPS deliveries anymore. Motional doesn't even exist, I don't think, in that context. So I hope it's nothing like that. And I don't think it seems anything like that, because DoorDash is obviously a real and vibrant competitor to Uber in terms of delivering. I think this is starting with, some of just the Dash source of products, and will expand to, restaurants and such. It makes a lot of sense, and it's a new vertical. And to me, shows that, Waymo is just not interested in, the original thesis of like, hey, we're going to, science project a autonomous technology, license it to OEMs and be on our way. They're looking at developing business models, whether it's a robotaxi business model that they're now expanding to the UK, or now a food delivery model that will start, with DoorDash. It's obviously also interesting that they did it with DoorDash and not Uber, where they've been a partner on the human delivery model, let's call it, otherwise known as rideshare.
It is, and So I start looking into the deal, and I put on my Inspector Clouseau hat, and I read the legal terms. And I want to read this here for you all. This is the exact language from the legal terms of service here as it relates to this deal. From now through the end of the year, Dash Pass members in these cities can receive $10 off one Waymo ride per month. A new promotion code will be issued at the start of each month. Once redeemed in the Waymo app, discount will automatically apply at checkout and to the next ride booked in eligible services: San Francisco, Los Angeles, Phoenix, from Monday through Friday between 2 a.m. and 2 p.m. One discount will be issued for each of the following months: October, November, and December to the 31st, 2025. Common things here, Walt? These are all Waymo One markets, and based on my experience with one of the world's largest airlines, it seems, reading the tea leaves here, that Waymo paid for this partnership.
Well, if they did, that it feels like it's probably new, because my guess is that on the Uber partnerships that they've done for rideshare type stuff, that it's Uber that's writing the check. So it's certainly, again, interesting that Waymo is doing that. And if that is true, we don't know whether it is or not, that again, it shows their interest in developing operating markets and operating models, not just build a technology that they're going to license and be on their way.
I think it's becoming very clear, in my opinion, Waymo's revenue / business model is a lot more complex than meets the surface.
Yeah, and I think, we look for these signposts as much as we can to understand, Waymo's plan for the future. There's certainly been kind of a roller coaster of views on that from the investor standpoint. Are they with Uber? Are they not? Are they a licensing model? Are they going to invest in cars? So the more they do this type of stuff, it becomes certainly more interesting.
Interesting and uncertainty is the New York City market, where Waymo's looking to expand. You have the energy issues, you have the policy issues, and then the head of the State Federation for Taxi Drivers came out this week and says, no more electric. We need to be able to go back to hybrids. Well, is there simply enough energy or infrastructure in New York to support Waymo's fleet, which you and I believe is going to have to be pretty significant?
Well, when I saw this article, first of all, I didn't realize that there was some requirement for taxis to move to electric. It makes sense, obviously, that there would be one. But it kind of made me smile when this New York Post article hit that outlined this, because I'm like, this is exactly what we talked about in terms of the challenges that Waymo is going to have in launching in New York, in terms of building up service centers and specifically charging for the amount of cars that they would have to deliver into the city. And that would be kind of a gating factor, even more so than just actual making of the cars, which has been another criticism or that we've had, or in terms of concern in terms of Waymo's ability to scale. So yeah, I mean, obviously someone's got to push back on the politicians that are expecting stuff that's just not possible, especially given this is the same political structure that restricts construction and the ability to actually build this stuff in the first place.
New York needs a lot. Do you want to have a little interesting insight? I went and did some energy research, and if folks want more, please reach out. There are only 300 DC fast chargers in New York City and only 1,200 L2 chargers. You're not going to scale a fleet on that.
And then the question is the guy that's complaining, the head of the taxi drivers, are the taxi companies going to be willing to invest in the infrastructure required to enable that many electric cars? Probably not. So, but who is? Guess who? Tesla is, and Waymo is, or Waymo through their partners, like Uber is. So you could theoretically have these companies come in to the city and be like, look, we're willing to invest in the city, and here's what you got to do in return. You have to let us actually use our autonomous vehicles in your city. You also have to, provide us some zoning ability and some, expedited permit process to build this stuff. And this will be better for your citizens. So these things have to be partnerships. But again, we're living in a political climate in some of these cities where there doesn't seem to be a willingness to partner, with, even different groups of people within the city, let alone with business.
Yeah. And there's an election coming up in New York, so let's not forget that. We all saw the debate the other night. And furthermore, in the data, Walt, this was really interesting. There are only 73 L2 chargers in New York City DOT managed parking garages and facilities. The restraint gets bigger and bigger. And furthermore, The energy is constrained. It's in Hunts Point. It's in Port Morse. It's in Queens. Hunts Point has its own, I'll characterize this, complexities. Port Morse has its own complexities, and Queens has a rising real estate cost with that casino that they're trying to go there. So the land's going to be expensive. The energy is going to be hard to get, which raises the question, why do you think Waymo has not set up a Waymo Operations LLC with an energy team to really build out this infrastructure they're going to need to truly scale, not just in New York City, but in cities around the United States and the globe?
Well, I think we know the reason, because Waymo has decided to partner with third parties as opposed to take ownership of themselves. Same theory that's happening with Uber. I went down a thought process that maybe, Uber has this app that matches drivers, with the riders, and like it's so complex, and maybe they could match electric cars with charging facilities. The challenge with that is like you need perfect information in terms of like how many people are at that charger at the time, who's controlling it, is it working at the time? So it just became more obvious that rather than try to use third-party infrastructure out there, again, having ownership of that infrastructure is going to provide tremendous value, given what you outlined in terms of the limitations in bringing power into a lot of these locations that would service New York City.
Right now, we have public photos. We don't have confirmation Waymo, but we have public photos that the vehicles are stored in Jersey City. You and I both know that's not going to scale.
The 7 Waymo vehicles, I mean, I don't think that's a relevant data point. If it's like, 10 vehicles?
If you're mapping New York City, why not already have them in the city?
I mean, you got to get what you can get and then move forward. I'm sure it's not that hard to find a parking garage that can handle the 10 or 15 vehicles that they have there. So I don't know the reason, but if you're just testing, you don't need it close to the users. They're not taking rides. It's their own people driving these cars.
There's something called the congestion tax. They got to pay it now.
I'm sure that Google can afford the congestion tax of bringing their cars, the 10 or 15 cars or whatever they have in the city, in and out.
Congestion tax aside, let's head back across the pond. We alluded to it last week that Europe was becoming a big market for autonomy. And this week we got an announcement from Stellantis. They're partnering with Pony.ai and they're deploying autonomous Peugeot vans in Luxembourg. Is this perhaps a sign that Stellantis wants to go back into autonomy? Let's not forget, Stellantis, through Fiat Chrysler, was the original partner for Waymo back in the day.
If you say so. I have no knowledge of Stellantis or what they're operating. To me, they're just another OEM. So it's nice to see an OEM doing something. I mean, getting back to the EV stuff in New York, it feels like a lot of these OEMs are, hesitant to invest in new technologies like AV because they invested in EVs thinking that there'd be these nationwide, requirements for people to buy electric cars, which never really materialized in actual demand. So, anything of an OEM partnering with a technology company like this is positive. Although I would say, on the flip side, I look at someone like, Toyota, who has their internal development. Maybe they're working with Mobileye to do stuff internally and just throwing cash around to other partners, whether it's, May Mobility or others. I don't know if we can draw any conclusions from this. It just doesn't seem like there's a sense of urgency on the OEMs, other than maybe Hyundai, in terms of pushing some platforms forward.
I would disagree and push back. There's urgency inside of Nissan with the Wayve deal. There's urgency inside of Honda with the Helm AI deal, which they put more money in this week. So the OEMs some are taking a more cautious approach, some are taking a faster approach. And at the end of the day, we're going to see what model works the best.
No offense to Pony.ai, right? But where is Waymo? Like, you have all these OEMs, you have Waymo, who's a leader in the most important market in the world, that has global aspirations, clearly with their announcement in the UK. Why aren't we not seeing more OEM partnerships with Waymo?
That's the big question, because Waymo clearly needs supply at the end of the day. They truly need more vehicles, and Stellantis has a long documented history of success with Waymo going back to the original Chrysler Pacifica minivan.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know what's going on with that, whether it's a Waymo issue or an OEM fear issue because it's Google, but hopefully one of these weeks we're going to come in here and we won't be talking about like some random OEM with a smaller tech guy, and it'll be Waymo with an announcement. I mean, we haven't seen basically anything out of them as it relates to OEM since that thing with Toyota, which was like an intent to talk basic announcement.
That was probably one of the shortest press releases I've ever read for our two major corporations getting together to do a deal.
Crazy, and silent about it ever since.
When do you think we get clarity on that? Or is that just going to kind of linger out there in the wind?
I don't know. I mean, I would hope that someone, I mean, this is such a small item, but like, how do you ever get questions in, right? You know, Dimitri is like fully, you know, protected, doesn't really take any real interviews asking him tough questions. It's not getting asked on earnings call of Google. So I don't know. We just have to kind of sit here and wait. By the way, did you see Dimitri's tweet earlier this week? If I can read it for our listeners. Dimitri, by the way, for our listeners that don't know, CEO or co-CEO of Waymo, he tweeted, "From day one, we built the Waymo Driver to generalize and perform across various use cases from ride hailing to delivery." This is him announcing the DoorDash, which is great. We love the DoorDash announcement. But it's funny this word generalize comes up, right? Because to me, it's been like their defensive word as a response to kind of what we've talked about as Autonomy 2.0, AI first, right? And then they've been using this word generalize, but now to argue that they're going to generalize from day one. I mean, I guess he's meaning generalize because like, oh yeah, we can take people and food. But like generalizing the way we think about it was did Waymo really start as something to generalize autonomy?
No, Waymo started back in 2009 as Project Chauffeur, and the original aspect was driver assist on the highway. And then Sebastian Throne has given many interviews about this over the years where people just stopped paying attention, so they had to go to level 4. So no, it was not built like that on day one. Yes, years ago, did they move towards that? Yes, and we saw that with Waymo Via Trucking, which they shut down, and by the way, for the record, we never had a clear answer on why they shut down. I'd love to know why it would truly shut down. Nobody will talk about it. So there's been a lot of, I would say, different changes in how they approach autonomy throughout the years, of Chauffeur to the Google self-driving car project to eventually Waymo. There's been a lot of changes over the years.
So moving on to what's for next week, there's a CEO that does answer questions on their earnings call from investors and otherwise, and does get interviewed quite often. That is Elon Musk, and Tesla does have their earnings call this week. So maybe we'll get some more data and updates for what the plans are for FSD, and obviously I think the really the big catalyst or the development point that everyone is waiting for, which is the timeline on when the safety attendant gets pulled out of the cars in Austin, and when they expand from Austin.
And I'm going to wait to see if you get another incremental update to your FSD. The one thing that we know about Tesla earnings call, Mr. Musk has no filter, and he'll pretty much answer any question either on the earnings call or replying to an X comment. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is scaling robotaxis. Walt, until next week.